If you had 1 minute to live, what would you do? It's a question you hear sometimes, maybe tossed around like a party game, or scribbled onto one of those motivational posters with a mountain in the background. But when the question is real, when your life is literally down to 60 seconds, you don't think in clever answers or grand gestures. You just listen to your heartbeat. And then, it stops. I was lying on the cold, sterile operating table at St. Luke's Memorial Hospital. The light above me buzzed faintly. There was a smell, something sharp and clean, like rubbing alcohol and metal. My chest burned like it was full of fire. The pain had started that morning, creeping in just behind the breastbone, a dull throb that wouldn't go away. By noon, I was sweating. My wife, Carol, had insisted we go to the ER. Good thing she did. They said I was having a heart attack. Then they wheeled me in for surgery. It was supposed to be routine. At least, that's what they said. But nothing felt routine when the monitors started screaming. I remember the doctor shouting something. "No pulse," someone yelled. "He's coding." There was a sudden, eerie quiet inside my body. Like a vacuum, or a door had slammed shut. And in that moment, I realized, I was dying. No, I was dead. There's a strange kind of stillness that comes with dying. It's not panic. It's not fear, not exactly. It's more like surrender. Your body doesn't belong to you anymore. You're watching it from inside a dark tunnel, growing dimmer by the second. Everything slowed. I heard the flatline, a long, unwavering beep that cut through the chaos like a blade. The kind they use in movies to tell you the character's gone. Except this wasn't a movie. This was me. The nurses scrambled. I could feel someone pressing hard on my chest, compressions. Another voice, charged to 200, clear. My body jerked as the shock hit me. But I wasn't in it anymore. Not really. I don't remember closing my eyes. I just remember, quiet. Like everything dropped away at once. No sound, no weight, no more pain. Then something strange happened. I felt light. Not just free of the body, but actually rising. Like someone had cut a string, and I was floating upward. The ceiling of the operating room came into view, from the top. And there I was, lying on the table below. Pale. Motionless. My mouth open, eyes closed. Tubes in my nose, wires on my chest. My body. But it wasn't me anymore. I hovered near the ceiling, watching the doctors work. One nurse wiped sweat from her brow. Another was counting under her breath. The surgeon barked orders, his voice tight with urgency. I wanted to tell them to stop. To let it go. That it was okay. But I couldn't speak. I couldn't touch. I could only observe. And then, the room began to fade. It started like mist rolling over the edges of my vision. The sterile white tiles of the operating room softened. The harsh overhead lights dimmed. Everything around me seemed to lose color, like a photograph slowly overexposed. And then there was nothing. Just darkness. Not black, not cold. Just stillness. But it wasn't empty. Not entirely. There was something, somewhere beyond me. A presence. A pull. I didn't know where I was going. But I didn't resist. And I wasn't afraid. That's what I remember most about those first seconds of death. The lack of fear. The way everything I thought would matter, money, regrets, old grudges, the bucket list I never finished, all of it dropped away like dead weight. I wasn't John Carter, retired Army sergeant, father of two, heart patient on table 5. I was just, awareness. A spark drifting beyond the edge of life. And somewhere deep inside me, one thought surfaced, not in words, but a feeling. This isn't the end. I know how that sounds. If you're listening to this right now, rolling your eyes, I get it. I used to be the same way. I didn't believe in God, not really. Not heaven, not reincarnation, not tunnels of light or angelic choirs. I believed in facts. In the ground under my feet. In coffee before sunrise and bills that never stopped coming. I believed in death, and I believed it was final. But in that moment, watching my lifeless body from the ceiling, I wasn't so sure. Because something had left that table. Something real. And that something was me. What came next changed everything I thought I knew, not just about dying, but about living. About love. About purpose. About why we're even here. I wasn't ready. Not for what I saw. Not for what I felt. Not for the choice I would soon have to make. They said I was gone for 3 minutes. 3 minutes without a heartbeat. 3 minutes between the last breath and the next. But in those 3 minutes, I saw more than I ever had in 67 years. And when I came back, I was not the same. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? There's a moment, maybe just a fraction of a second, when you know. You know that you're no longer in your body. Not dreaming. Not hallucinating. You're out. That's what happened to me. 1 second, I was in the operating room, feeling pressure on my chest, pain behind my ribs, chaos around me. The next, I was above it all, literally. I floated. I know that sounds ridiculous. But there's no other word for it. I wasn't walking or flying or drifting like a ghost. I was just, rising. Effortlessly. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Maybe it was the anesthesia. Maybe I was imagining it all. But when I looked down, that's when the panic set in, not fear, but something deeper. Recognition. Because I saw me. I was lying on the operating table. My chest exposed, the skin pale and waxy. A surgeon's gloved hands were working furiously, applying compressions. A nurse was shouting numbers. Another was squeezing a bag to help me breathe. And then, the machine beeped a flatline. My heart had stopped. And yet, there I was. Above it all. Watching. Detached, but hyper-aware. From up near the ceiling, I could see the entire operating room in perfect detail. Every tray of instruments. Every wrinkle on the surgeon's forehead. I even noticed a little coffee stain on the shoe of a young nurse standing in the corner, shaking slightly, her lips moving in prayer. I could hear them. Not just their words, but something deeper. Their thoughts. He's gone, one nurse thought. Too long without oxygen. Another was thinking of her own father, who had died just a year earlier. Her hands trembled. The surgeon's mind was sharp, focused, but I caught something underneath it. Guilt. I should have caught this earlier. I should have been faster. It was strange. Beautiful, even. Not in a happy way, but in a way that made me feel part of something much bigger. Like I was seeing the mechanics behind the curtain of life. I felt no judgment. No anger. No panic. Just clarity. Then. I started to move. Not horizontally. Not forward or back. Up. The ceiling didn't stop me. I passed through it like fog. One moment I was in the ore, the next I was in the level above, looking down into a waiting room. There was Carol, my wife of 42 years. She sat with her hands clasped tight around her purse. Her knuckles were white. Her lips were moving, though no sound came out. I recognized the words. She was praying. I hadn't seen her pray in years. Maybe not since our son's deployment overseas. But there she was now, whispering to a god she wasn't sure she believed in. Tears ran down her cheeks. I reached for her, instinctively. I wanted to hold her. To tell her I was okay. But I had no hands. No body. Only presence. And somehow, she felt me. She looked up, straight into the air above her. Straight at me. And for one strange second, our eyes met, even though mine didn't exist anymore. Then, the world began to dissolve again. Not like before. This was slower. Like colors bleeding off a canvas, or a fog rolling in to hide the edges of reality. The hospital faded. The walls. The floors. The furniture. Everything around me melted into light, soft, golden, alive. I wasn't falling. I wasn't flying. I was being carried. The only thing I could compare it to is how it felt when I was a child, and my father would lift me onto his shoulders. That sense of being safe, weightless, and high above the worries of the world. I was wrapped in that feeling again. Except this time, it was coming from everywhere. The light wasn't just something I saw, it was something I felt. It had warmth. Intelligence. Even, personality. It welcomed me. Not with words, but with something deeper. A kind of deep, overwhelming knowing. You are safe. You are home. I couldn't speak, but if I had, I might have said, "Where am I?" And the answer, though not spoken aloud, arrived instantly. You're not in a place. You're in a presence. Let me try to explain. I wasn't floating in the clouds. There were no pearly gates. No harp music or bearded figure on a throne. But I was somewhere. Or rather, I was with something, a presence so vast, so full of love and understanding, that it made my entire life feel like a single heartbeat in an endless ocean of time. I don't know how long I was there. Time didn't exist the way it does here. Maybe seconds. Maybe centuries. All I knew was that I never wanted to leave. But then, something began to change. The light grew brighter, not harsh, but more intense, like it was coming into focus. And within it, I saw shapes. Not people, exactly. More like silhouettes made of light. They shimmered and shifted, but they felt familiar. One of them came closer. I couldn't see a face. But I knew it. Not with my eyes. But with my soul. It felt like love in its purest form. And it had a message. One I wasn't ready to hear. You have a choice. That voice, or thought, or feeling, came through everything. Clear and soft and eternal. You can stay, or you can return. I didn't understand. I thought I was already gone. I thought this was it, the afterlife, the beyond, whatever word you want to use. But something inside me stirred. A flicker of memory. Carol's face in the waiting room. My daughter's voice from a birthday voicemail I never returned. The tiny fingers of my newborn grandson, gripping mine just a week earlier. Love. Responsibility. Unfinished things. I wasn't sure what I would choose, but I had the feeling that the real journey was just beginning. You hear people talk about the light at the end of the tunnel. But it wasn't like that. There was no tunnel, no long corridor pulling me forward. It was more like the light had been there all along, waiting, just beyond a thin veil I hadn't known existed. And now, I was in it. Not just surrounded by it, part of it. I didn't have eyes, but I could see. Not with sight, but with understanding. The way you know someone's looking at you even when your back is turned. Everything here worked like that, beyond the five senses, beyond the brain. It was like I was thinking with my soul. The light wasn't white. Not really. It shimmered with colors I don't have names for. Blues that sang, golds that pulsed with emotion, a warm lavender hue that felt like a hug from someone you missed for decades. It wasn't just visual. The colors had weight. They had texture. They had meaning. And the sound, if you could call it that, was like a harmony that came from inside me, around me, through me. Music without instruments. A frequency of peace. It was perfect. Then, the presence returned. It didn't speak in words. It didn't have a face. But it knew me. Not just facts about me, my birth date, my name, my favorite fishing spot. No. It knew me. It knew the things I never said out loud. The pain I hid behind sarcasm. The guilt I buried under decades of toughness. The little prayers I whispered into the dark when I thought no one was listening. And it loved me anyway. Fully. Without condition. Without agenda. Just, love. It's hard to describe what that does to a person. Imagine carrying a weight your whole life, a weight so familiar you don't even feel it anymore. Then imagine someone lifting it in an instant. You don't just feel lighter. You remember what it feels like to be whole. That's what this presence did to me. It reminded me of who I was before the pain, before the pride, before the fear. Then something shifted again. From within the light, a sort of space opened. Not a room exactly. More like a realm. And in that realm, I saw moments. Floating, spinning, unfolding like holograms. My memories, but not like how we remember things on Earth. These weren't fuzzy snapshots. They were alive. I watched myself as a boy, sitting under a willow tree behind our old house in Indiana. I was maybe 6. I had just caught my first firefly, and I was holding it in a mason jar. The light from the insect flickered inside the glass, and my face lit up like I'd discovered magic. I felt what I had felt that day. The joy. The wonder. Then I saw something else, something I'd buried deep. I was 17. Angry. Arrogant. I said something cruel to my mother, something that made her cry. In this realm, I didn't just remember it. I experienced it. From her perspective. I felt the sting of the words. The sadness. The ache in her chest as she turned away, pretending it didn't hurt as much as it did. I cried. Right there in the light, I cried, not with tears, because I had no eyes, but with my whole being. The kind of weeping that comes from your soul finally seeing itself. And still, the presence did not judge. It simply showed me. Taught me. Everything you do matters. Scene after scene came, times I had been kind, and times I had been selfish. Small moments I had long forgotten. A smile I gave to a stranger on the subway that stopped them from stepping off the platform. A phone call I didn't return that left someone alone in their grief. It all mattered. The good. The bad. The forgotten. And through it all, I was not condemned. I was being loved into clarity. There was no scoreboard. No punishment. Just the invitation to understand, to grow, to heal. And with that came something else. A choice. You may stay, or return. That feeling again. Not words, not a voice. But an offer. To remain in this realm of light, of truth, of wholeness. Or to go back. Back to the world of time and pain and noise. Back to the body that had broken beneath the weight of a failing heart. Back to grief and taxes and news broadcasts and arthritis. Why would anyone choose that? I thought of staying. I wanted to stay. But then, faces appeared. Not vividly, more like impressions within the light. My wife Carol. My daughter, Olivia, her eyes so much like her mother's. And my grandson. I hadn't even had a chance to hold him properly. I felt a tug. Not physical. Deeper. Purpose. Something left unfinished. The presence let me feel it, not in guilt, but in gentle encouragement. Like a teacher placing a hand on your shoulder and saying, "You still have more to give." So I asked, without speaking, "If I go back, will I remember this?" The answer came as a sensation, like a breeze of warmth across my being. "You will remember enough. Enough to change you. Enough to carry the light into the darkness." I hesitated. Not because I was unsure. But because I knew, once I returned, nothing would ever be the same. I would wake in a world that no longer fit quite right. I would speak of a truth others couldn't see. And yet, I chose to go. Because love doesn't stay where it's easy. Love returns, even when it hurts. I don't know what I expected. When you hear about near-death experiences, you hear a lot about tunnels of light and angels with wings. Some people describe fields of flowers or meeting deceased loved ones. But no one ever talks about the life review in the way it actually happens. It's not like flipping through a photo album. It's not like watching a movie. It's more like becoming your life. Like stepping inside every moment, every decision, every regret, every joy you ever experienced. All of it at once. The light, the presence, the love. It pulls you into everything you've ever done, every person you've ever met, and you feel it in a way that goes beyond words. For me, it started with the simple things. The moments you never think to remember until you're forced to look back. I saw the first time I held Carol's hand. It was in a diner. We were in our 20s. I was about to leave for basic training, and we hadn't even been dating long. I remember the way the booth smelled, coffee, bacon, and something stale, like the floor had been swept 100 times. I remember the way she laughed when I cracked a dumb joke. And I remember how, when the conversation slowed down, her hand found mine, quietly. Just a soft brush of skin. In the review, I didn't just see that moment. I felt it. I felt her fingers wrapped around mine, warm and tender, grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. I felt the uncertainty I had back then. The fear of not knowing what would happen next. And yet, that simple touch, that one small gesture, told me everything I needed to know. She was with me. Then, just as suddenly, the moment shifted. I was no longer sitting in that diner, with Carol beside me. I was standing at my mother's hospital bed. She was frail, barely able to speak, and yet there I was, staring at her like a stranger. She was fading, and I hadn't been there enough to help her. The words of comfort I gave her felt hollow, like I wasn't really present. Like I was too busy with work, with life, with everything that didn't matter. She didn't deserve that. She deserved more than my distracted, half-hearted visits. And in the review, I felt it all. I felt the weight of my neglect, the missed calls, the times I told her I was too busy to come by. It wasn't just regret. It was pain, the sharp, desperate ache of realizing you didn't give enough to the people who loved you most. I wanted to change it. I wanted to go back and give her more time. I wanted to be there. But I couldn't. It was too late. But there was beauty in that pain. Not in a way that felt good, but in a way that opened something inside me. I understood now. I understood that everything I did, or didn't do, rippled out. I understood that love isn't just about grand gestures, but about the small, daily choices. The ones we take for granted. The moment when I said, "I love you," without meaning it. The time I turned down a friend's invitation because I was too tired to go out. The days I chose to bury myself in work instead of spending time with my children. Each of those moments became clear. Like pieces of a puzzle I had forgotten to finish. The faces of the people I had hurt, whether with my words or with my absence, came into view. I could feel their pain, their disappointment, their anger. But not in a way that condemned me. No, this wasn't about shame or guilt. It was simply about seeing. Really seeing. But then, something shifted again. I was no longer focusing on my mistakes. I started to see the moments where I had been present. The times I'd shown love when it mattered. The time I'd given a stranger my jacket on a cold day, or spent hours helping a friend move when I was exhausted. I could feel the warmth of that love, too. The way those moments lifted someone else's life, no matter how small. I felt the joy I'd brought into my children's lives, just by being there, attending their school plays, fixing their bikes, listening to their stories. I could feel the gratitude they had for me, even in my imperfect way. And in that light, the mistakes didn't disappear. But they became human. They became part of the full picture. It wasn't all black and white. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about trying, and sometimes failing, and still showing up the best you could. Through it all, the present stayed with me. It didn't judge. It didn't say, you should have done this better, or you could have done more. It just witnessed. It showed me my life, not as a list of accomplishments, but as a journey. A series of moments, of decisions, of opportunities to love or to hurt, to build or to destroy. And it asked me one simple question, again and again. Did you love? And here's the thing that really changed everything. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about checking off the boxes. The presence wasn't asking, did you live a perfect life? It wasn't measuring success in the way we measure it here on earth. The question was, did you love, when it mattered? Did you love enough to try? I saw that even the smallest acts of kindness were powerful. A moment spent listening, even when you didn't have time. A hand offered when it would have been easier to walk away. I saw that, at the end of it all, love is what we're remembered for. Not the things we own or the titles we achieve, but the people we leave behind, the way we impacted their hearts. And as I stood in that place of clarity, I knew, without a doubt, that love was the only thing that truly mattered. The light around me began to intensify again, and the life review faded. But I was different now. I could feel the weight of every moment I had ever lived, and I was okay with it. I wasn't perfect, far from it. But I had tried. And I had loved, in the only way I knew how. And somehow, that made all the difference. It's strange to think about the moments just before you make a decision that will change everything. When you're standing on the edge of something vast, something unknown, and you're asked to choose, whether to stay where it's safe, where it feels right, or to return to the chaos, the uncertainty of life. It's not easy. And in the moment, it doesn't feel like a choice at all. It feels more like an inevitability. Like a call you can't resist. I was still surrounded by that overwhelming light, the warmth of it wrapping around me. I could feel my own being, my soul, soaking in that peace, that all-encompassing love. The moments of regret, the sharp pain from the past, all of it had softened into understanding. I had felt it all, the good and the bad. And in that moment, it was all woven together, making sense in ways that the human mind could never fully grasp. I was at home. More so than I had ever felt in my life. It wasn't about a place, not about a location. It was about belonging. A sense of perfect peace, of clarity, of unity with something much larger than myself. I felt complete. And then, just as I was starting to lose myself in that feeling, the choice appeared. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a sudden announcement or an intervention. It was simply there. A thought, a sensation, a presence that filled the space around me. You may stay, or you may return. I knew what it meant. I knew the consequences of either option, though neither seemed to come with a clear path. There was no map, no guide. It was my decision. The thought of staying seemed so simple, so natural. I felt the pull, like the warmth of a sun you never want to leave. But as much as I wanted to remain in that place, I knew something was missing. Life. The life I had left behind. My family. My friends. The unfinished things. I thought of Carol, her face in the waiting room, so full of hope. My children, growing up with or without me. My grandson, who would never truly know me if I didn't go back. I thought of the people I'd hurt, the times I'd been selfish or distracted, and how they, too, needed closure, needed to know. I wasn't finished. Not yet. At that moment, something deep inside me stirred. A kind of love. A kind of responsibility. I wasn't just here to exist. I was here to make a difference. I was here to finish. It wasn't about doing everything perfectly. It wasn't about fixing every wrong or making up for every mistake. It was about the next step, the next chance to love, to grow, to learn. I had seen enough in the life review to know that the work I needed to do wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The presence didn't say anything more. It didn't push me. It didn't make me choose. But it was there, gently guiding me. Offering its wisdom, its understanding, its unconditional love. And then, I made the choice. I chose to return. The moment I made the decision, I felt the presence begin to withdraw, slowly pulling away from me. The light, which had enveloped me in every direction, began to recede, pulling itself back like the tide after a storm. I felt a pull, a gentle tug, downward, toward something. It wasn't harsh, but it was undeniable. My time here was up. The decision had been made, and I had to go back. But even as I started to leave that sacred space of light, something in me hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready. The thought of going back to the noise, to the pain of the world, felt overwhelming. But as if sensing my hesitation, the presence reached out again. You are not alone. You will never be alone. Those words, so simple, yet so powerful, struck me with the force of truth. It wasn't about going back to fix everything. It wasn't about doing it alone. The presence would be with me. In my heart. In my soul. In the love I would give, in the love I would receive. And then I felt something else. A sharp tug. Not physical. More like a string attached to my chest, pulling me back into my body. I felt my spirit rush downward, toward the earth, toward the familiar weight of the world I had left behind. I didn't feel the pain of the operating room. I didn't feel the cold of the sterile hospital bed. But I felt the pull of life, drawing me back to what I knew. And in that moment, I realized something important. I wasn't going back to fix anything. I wasn't going back to erase the past. I wasn't going back to be perfect. I was going back to live. To love. My vision came back in a flash. The cold, the sterile lights, the soft beep of the heart monitor. I was back in the operating room. I could hear the chaos around me again. The doctors shouting, the nurses rushing. My body, my real, fragile, broken body, was there, still struggling to breathe, still fighting to survive. But something in me had changed. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't scared of what might happen next. Because I knew now, deep down, that this wasn't the end. This was just another chapter. A chance to keep going. To keep learning. To keep loving. And just as I was beginning to settle into the familiar panic of my body, I heard Carol's voice. She was whispering my name, but it wasn't just a sound. It was a lifeline. A reminder of everything I had left behind. John. Stay with me. I need you. It was the same voice I had heard earlier, from above. The voice I knew. The voice that had called me back. I wasn't done. I wasn't ready to go. Not yet. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The first thing I became aware of was pain. I don't mean the kind of discomfort we all live with, a bad back, a twisted ankle, or even the dull ache of old age. No, this was something different. It was sharp. It was jarring. It was as if every nerve in my body was screaming to remind me I was alive, to remind me I was still here. I was back in my body. It was a strange sensation. I couldn't explain it at first. I felt myself. The weight of the sheets on my legs. The coldness of the metal bed underneath me. The feeling of my skin, prickling with heat, damp with sweat. I had no idea how long I had been unconscious, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was here again. I was alive. But at what cost? The light I had just left, that all-encompassing warmth, the peace, it felt so far away. A distant memory. A dream that faded the moment I opened my eyes. I tried to focus, to get a grip on the world around me, but everything felt blurry. Not just in the physical sense, but emotionally. I didn't know who I was at first. I didn't know where I fit in anymore. The doctors and nurses surrounded me. Their voices were distant, muffled, like they were speaking through a thick fog. I could barely hear what they were saying. But I could feel their urgency, the way they moved around me, checking machines, adjusting IVs. The beeping of the heart monitor was steady now, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. They didn't know. They didn't know what had just happened to me. What I had just seen. They didn't know I had been somewhere else entirely, in a place that was nothing like this sterile, mechanical world. And it hit me, how unimportant everything felt now. The beeping. The 4 lines. The machines that monitored my heart. None of it mattered in the way it once had. In the light, I had learned that these things were just noise. Just distractions. Real life was something else. It was about love, about connection, about making choices that mattered. And here I was, stuck in a body that was slowly waking up from the trauma of near death, and I was unsure how to reconnect with this world again. "Mr. Carter, can you hear me?" The voice belonged to Dr. Jensen, the lead surgeon. His face hovered above me, his eyes scanning my vitals with a professional intensity. I could see his lips moving, but I couldn't find the energy to respond. My tongue felt thick. My throat was dry. My body ached in places I didn't even realize I had muscles. But it was more than just physical discomfort. It was emotional. I felt detached from it all, like I was watching myself from a distance, a spectator in my own life. I had come back to this. This mess of tubes and wires. This world of bills, schedules, and expectations. I didn't belong here anymore. I felt like a stranger in my own skin. It's like when you wake up from a dream and for a moment, you can't remember where you are, who you are, what you're supposed to be doing. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Was I the man I had been before? The man who lived for his career? The man who avoided deep emotions and kept people at arm's length? Was I the man who had just seen beyond the veil? The man who had felt the peace of the light? The man who had seen the threads of love weaving through his life like golden strands? I didn't know how to fit those two versions of myself together. They didn't make sense side by side. The days that followed were like swimming through molasses. My body was sluggish, weak. I couldn't get out of bed without feeling dizzy. I couldn't focus on anything for long. The doctors kept running tests. They were concerned about my heart, concerned about my recovery. But they didn't understand. None of them could understand what had happened to me. And then there was Carol. She was there, sitting beside me, holding my hand as she always had. But I could see it in her eyes, she didn't get it. She didn't understand why I was acting so strange. Why I kept staring off into space. Why I wouldn't talk much about what had happened in the operating room. She kept telling me everything was going to be okay, that I was going to get better, that we had a future together. But I couldn't share what I had seen. I couldn't explain it. How could I? How could I explain a love so deep it felt like it would swallow me whole? How could I explain the peace, the clarity? How could I tell her that the world we were living in now, the one with its stresses, its problems, its mundane struggles, felt so small in comparison. I wanted to talk to her. I wanted to tell her everything. But I didn't know how to make her see it. To make her understand what I had been through. What I had learned. It wasn't until the third day after waking up that I realized what was happening. I was grieving. I wasn't grieving my old life. I wasn't grieving the man I had been. No, I was grieving the light. The peace. The certainty that came from knowing, really knowing, that there was something greater than all this. I was grieving the truth that I had tasted, but that I now couldn't hold on to. The truth that didn't fit into this world. But the grief was part of the process. Part of my return. And so I began the slow work of adjusting. Of finding a way to merge the man I had been before with the man I had become after the light. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't know what it would look like. But I knew this. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't just go back to living a life without meaning, without purpose. I had learned something deep and lasting, something I couldn't ignore. And so, as I lay there, surrounded by the beeping machines and the sterile smell of the hospital room, I made a silent vow to myself. I would find a way to live in the world again, but this time, it would be different. This time, I would live with intention. I would love with purpose. I would make every moment count. It was a choice, just like the one I had made to return. And this time, it wasn't about surviving. It was about living. The first time I walked outside after the hospital, the world felt foreign. It wasn't the sights. It wasn't the sounds. It was the feeling of the world that had changed. The world around me, the one I had been living in for so long, seemed distant. It felt smaller somehow. Like a reality that was meant for someone else, a version of life I didn't quite belong to anymore. I stepped outside into the crisp air, feeling the weight of the sun on my face. It should have felt comforting, but it didn't. It felt strange. The light was the same, but the way it touched my skin was different. My body remembered the warmth, but my soul no longer quite fit within it. Carol walked beside me, her hand lightly resting on my arm. She had been the one to encourage me to leave the hospital, to take a step outside, to breathe again. She kept talking, mostly about mundane things, what she'd done while I was in the hospital, what groceries we needed to pick up, how the neighbors were doing. Her voice should have been a comfort. But every time she spoke, I found myself withdrawing further inside. She didn't understand. She couldn't. How could she? I couldn't explain it to her. Not yet. It wasn't her fault. She didn't know what I had seen, what I had experienced. She couldn't know the depth of the shift that had happened within me. The woman I had been, the one who had survived years of marriage and parenthood, was still there. But she was a shadow of the person I had been before I died. The world had shrunk in size. The importance of all the things I had once obsessed over seemed so trivial now. I stood at the edge of our yard, looking out over the familiar landscape, the green grass, the towering oak tree that I used to sit under when I needed time to think. It was all so familiar, yet I felt completely disconnected from it. The life I had been living, the way I had seen things, no longer felt real. It felt like an illusion. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe. To find some connection again. But it wasn't easy. It was as if my mind and soul were still trying to reconcile the truth of what I had seen with the reality I had returned to. It was like trying to fit a new puzzle piece into an old picture frame. It just didn't match. It didn't fit. I stood there, feeling lost, when Carol's voice broke through my thoughts. "John, are you okay?" she asked softly. "You've been standing here for a while." I turned to look at her, and I saw the concern on her face. The way her brow furrowed, the way her lips pressed together, unsure of how to help me. I'm not sure," I replied quietly, my voice hoarse from days of barely speaking. "I'm still figuring things out." Carol nodded. She didn't push me, but I could see the frustration building in her. She didn't understand. She couldn't. I wished I could tell her. I wished I could explain it all, the peace I had felt, the clarity, the knowledge that love was the only thing that mattered. But how do you explain something that is beyond words? How do you tell someone that the world they've always known isn't the one you're living in anymore? That night, after dinner, Carol and I sat down on the couch. I couldn't help but notice how much had changed. The silence between us was heavier now. She was still the woman I loved, but the space between us felt wider than it ever had before. She reached for the remote, but I stopped her. "Carol," I began, my voice hesitant. "I need to tell you something." She turned to face me, her expression softening. "What is it, John? You've been so quiet lately." I took a deep breath. I didn't know how to start, but I couldn't keep pretending. I had to say it. "I died, Carol. I was dead for 3 minutes." I met her gaze, watching her reaction closely. I don't know how else to explain it, but I was somewhere else. I was somewhere that felt more real than this. More peaceful. More whole. Her eyes widened, and I could see the mixture of concern and confusion on her face. She opened her mouth to say something, but I rushed to continue before she could speak. "I know it sounds crazy, but I saw things. I felt things. I saw my life, the people I've hurt, the people I've loved, the choices I've made. But I also saw something else. Something beyond this world. I can't fully explain it, but I know it was real. I know it was truth." Carol's mouth closed. She looked down at her hands for a moment, processing what I had said. Then, she finally looked up at me again, her voice soft but hesitant. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "You're saying you saw, what? Heaven? Something after death?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes. I don't have all the answers, Carol. But what I saw, what I felt. It changed everything." There was a long pause, and I could feel the tension between us building. Carol opened her mouth to say something, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't believe me. And I couldn't blame her. How could she? "I'm not asking you to understand, Carol. I'm just asking you to be patient with me," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to explain it, but I need you to know that I'm different now. The way I see life. It's different." Carol didn't say anything for a long time. She just sat there, her hands resting in her lap. The silence was heavy, but it was the only thing I could feel in that moment. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know what to say, John. But I love you. And I'll be here. I'll be here with you while you figure this out. I don't understand, but I'll try." And that was enough. It wasn't a perfect answer. It wasn't the resolution I was hoping for. But it was a start. The next few weeks were difficult. I spent most of my time trying to come to terms with the man I was now. The man who had seen the truth and couldn't unsee it. I began to talk to Carol more, but the conversations were never easy. She wanted to believe me, but I could see the doubts lingering in her eyes. I wasn't angry. How could I be? She hadn't been with me in that place. She hadn't felt the peace, the love, the clarity. She didn't know what I had seen. But I did. And that's what kept me going. That's what kept me moving forward, one uncertain step at a time. I started to change. Slowly at first. I called people I had neglected over the years. I mended broken relationships. I found myself appreciating the small moments, the sound of my children's laughter, the feel of Carol's hand in mine, the beauty of the sunrise. I couldn't go back to who I was. But maybe, just maybe, I could become something better. And so, I began to awaken. Slowly. One step at a time. In the days that followed my return to life, the world seemed louder. More vibrant, but also more overwhelming. I had come back with a new lens through which I saw everything. And while the truth I had discovered in the light was undeniable, it didn't make living with it easy. It felt like I was a different person, but everyone around me was still the same. Carol, the kids, the neighbors, my co-workers, they all continued as if nothing had changed. As if I hadn't just crossed a threshold, experienced a reality so profound that it redefined everything. But the truth was, I had changed. And the hardest part of returning wasn't the physical recovery. It was adjusting to a life that no longer seemed to hold the same weight as it once had. At work, I found myself staring at emails that didn't matter. I would read through the mundane reports, the deadlines, the complaints from clients, but none of it seemed as urgent or important as it once had. The words on the screen blurred as I drifted into thought. Why had I spent all these years chasing these things? The promotions, the raises, the constant push to do more, be more, climb higher. They seemed so small now. And then there was the feeling that came after. The feeling that I had to explain myself to everyone around me. To Carol, to my colleagues, to the world. The need to justify my transformation. I had seen the light, felt the peace, experienced the love that transcended everything. And yet, how could I expect anyone to understand that? It was the same day I returned to work that I got my first real taste of the disconnect between who I had been and who I was becoming. I was in a meeting, sitting in the conference room with the same team that had worked with me for years. They were discussing a new project, talking about budgets, timelines, and resources. They were all so eager to push forward, so focused on more. As I sat there, listening to them talk about the numbers, the costs, the projected growth, I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't that I disagreed with the importance of business, or that I didn't see the need for growth. But it all seemed so empty. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all chasing something we couldn't hold, something that didn't matter in the end. I looked around the table. Everyone was so focused on what needed to be done, but I could feel my own mind drifting. I couldn't stop thinking about the life I had experienced, about the people I had seen in the light, about the love that had surrounded me, about the truth I had been shown. At one point, I zoned out so completely that I didn't even realize they were waiting for me to respond. A voice broke through my thoughts. John. Mark, my assistant, said. What do you think? I blinked and looked around, disoriented. I'm sorry, what was the question? I stammered, my words coming out awkwardly. Mark seemed puzzled, but the others didn't seem to notice my lapse. I had always been the dependable one, the one who kept things moving. But now, I felt as though I was barely holding on to the thread of normality. I wanted to be honest with them, to tell them that what we were doing didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But that wouldn't make sense, would it? So I just nodded and muttered something about staying on track and meeting the deadlines. The same old response I had given 100 times before. But it didn't feel right anymore. Later that afternoon, as I sat in my office, I found myself looking out the window at the city below. The hustle and bustle. The cars. The people rushing from one place to another. Everyone so focused on their goals, their ambitions, their to-do lists. I didn't know what my goals were anymore. I didn't know where I fit in this world. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty, I couldn't keep living like I had been. I couldn't go back to the old ways, the old mindset that had driven me for so long. The desire to climb, to achieve, to collect more. I had learned too much. I had seen beyond the veil of life and death, and the truth had burned itself into my soul. Love. Connection. Purpose. That was what mattered. Not the promotions. Not the accolades. Not the money or the prestige. It was the relationships, the people in your life. The love you gave and received. The moments that made you feel alive, truly alive. I started making small changes in my daily routine. I began leaving work earlier, spending more time with Carol, with the kids. I called my old friends, the ones I hadn't spoken to in years, and invited them over. I started to listen more, to appreciate the moments, the conversations. But, of course, it wasn't easy. I couldn't simply erase the life I had lived before, the man I had been. There were times when the old habits crept in, the pressure to perform, the anxiety about the future, the nagging feeling that I was falling behind. But each time, I reminded myself, that's not what really matters anymore. I began telling Carol more about what I had experienced. I would wake up early, sometimes before the sun came up, and I would sit with her over a cup of coffee. We would talk about everything, the kids, our future, our hopes. And then, when the conversation turned quiet, I would tell her about the light. About the peace I had felt. About the love that enveloped me and how it had changed everything. At first, Carol didn't know how to respond. She still struggled to fully understand, but she listened. And that, in itself, was enough. She didn't need to understand everything. She just needed to be there, to support me, to let me be the person I was becoming. And in time, she started to change too. Slowly. But she did. She became more open, more patient. She started letting go of the small things that used to irritate her. The things that used to drive us both crazy, schedules, lists, the never-ending rush of life, they started to feel less important to her too. But it wasn't just Carol. I started to notice a change in my relationships with everyone around me. My co-workers started to notice I was different, but in subtle ways. I wasn't the same driven, ambitious man I had been. I was more present, more engaged in their lives, more interested in the people behind the job titles. I called my parents more, and we had longer conversations. I reached out to old friends, apologizing for the distance I had put between us. I found myself forgiving people for old wounds, letting go of grudges I had held for far too long. Life became simpler. More meaningful. It wasn't about climbing the ladder or accumulating things. It was about the people in my life, the moments I shared with them, and the love that connected us all. I had seen the truth. And now, I was living with it. Every day was a choice to love more deeply, to listen more attentively, to be present in the moment. The truth was, I wasn't the same person I had been before. And that was okay. In fact, it was more than okay. It was everything. I never expected my experience to affect anyone but myself. After all, it had been a personal journey, something that happened to me alone. Or so I thought. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to realize something profound. The changes within me weren't just changing my relationship with Carol, my kids, or the people I had been closest to. They were starting to ripple out into the world. At first, it was just small things. Little moments. It started at the grocery store when I smiled at a woman in line behind me who was struggling to find enough change to pay for her items. Without even thinking, I reached into my wallet and handed her the cash. She looked at me in surprise, her eyes welling up with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what to say. I simply nodded. I didn't need to say anything. It wasn't about the money. It was about the moment, the human connection. I'd been given so much, and suddenly, the idea of holding on to it all felt so small. It was about spreading kindness, sharing love, even in the smallest ways. Then there was the time I was on a business call with a colleague I'd known for years, Mark. We'd worked together on countless projects, always with the same focus on getting the job done, pushing through, and reaching the finish line. But today was different. As we discussed some upcoming strategy, I found myself questioning the point of it all. Mark was rattling off numbers, projecting growth, discussing profitability, all the things that used to keep me up at night. And as I listened, I realized that I wasn't listening to him anymore. I wasn't hearing the business jargon, I was hearing a person. "Mark," I said, interrupting him. "How are you doing?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm fine, John. We're just making sure the project stays on track," he replied, his voice sounding distracted. "No, I mean you. How are you really doing? How's your family? How's everything?" I asked, genuinely curious. There was silence again. I could hear him shifting in his chair. "Well, if you must know, things have been tough at home," he admitted, his voice softer now. "I've been working so much, I haven't been there for my wife and kids. It's like I don't know how to balance everything anymore." My heart went out to him. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had invested in the same unbalanced life he was living. I wasn't immune to it. I had been there too, putting my work, my ambition, my drive for success above everything else. "Mark," I said, my voice steady but gentle. "I've been there. I've been chasing things that don't matter. But you're not alone. It's okay to slow down. It's okay to focus on the people who matter. You don't have to do it all alone." There was a long pause before Mark spoke again. "Thanks, John. I didn't expect that, but I think I needed to hear it. I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to say, but I meant it." And I realized, in that moment, that my perspective had changed so completely that it was now starting to affect those around me. Later that week, I went to a local cafe to meet an old friend of mine, Susan, who I hadn't seen in years. We used to hang out when we were younger, before life got busy and we both drifted into different directions. She was sitting at a corner table, waiting for me when I arrived. She looked the same, still that infectious laugh, that easy smile. But something had shifted between us, and I could feel it from the moment we sat down. "So, John, what's new with you?" Susan asked, stirring her coffee absently. Her tone was casual, but there was an underlying curiosity. "Everything's new, actually," I replied with a small chuckle, trying to keep the conversation light. She raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting that answer. "I know this sounds strange, but I've been changed," I continued, my voice quieter now. "I had a near-death experience a few months ago, and it's completely shifted the way I see life." Susan blinked. "Wait. What? You died?" Her eyes widened with disbelief. I nodded. "I know it sounds unbelievable. It's hard to put into words, but what I experienced, it changed me. I've seen things, Susan. I've seen beyond what we know. I've seen what matters, and it's not what I thought. It's not the things we chase or the success we try to get. It's about love. Connection. Being present with the people around you." She leaned in, intrigued. "What do you mean? What exactly did you see?" I took a deep breath. "I can't explain it all, not in a way that'll make sense. But I saw what comes after this life. And it's more beautiful than we can imagine. It's more peaceful, more loving. I felt like I was in the presence of something much bigger than myself. I felt whole." Susan sat back in her chair, her face serious now. "I don't know what to say, John. That's intense." "I don't know how else to say it," I replied, my eyes meeting hers. "But everything feels different now. I don't care about the things I used to. I care about the people I love, and the moments we share together." For a long time, she was silent, her gaze distant, as if processing everything I had said. Then, slowly, she spoke again. "You've always been a bit of a workaholic, John. I remember when you used to put everything into your career. It was like you were trying to prove something. But now it sounds like you're living for something much deeper." I nodded. "I am. And I want to share that with people. I want them to know that there's more than just the daily grind. That life is short, and we have to make it count. We have to love, and we have to be present." Susan smiled softly. "I get it. I don't know if I could ever experience something like that, but hearing you talk about it, it makes me think about the way I've been living my life. Maybe I've been too focused on the wrong things. By the time I left the cafe, I was overwhelmed. I hadn't expected to have such a deep conversation with Susan, but it had felt like the right moment. The right connection. I could feel the ripple spreading, slowly, but surely. I wasn't alone in this. The truth I had seen was something that, I believed, could help others too. I wasn't pushing it on anyone. I wasn't trying to convert people to my new way of thinking. But if I could plant the seed, if I could offer them a glimpse of what I had seen, perhaps, just perhaps, they might start looking at their lives differently too. As I drove home, I thought about all the people I had come into contact with since my experience. Carol, the kids, my coworkers, my friends, all of them had begun to notice something different about me. A shift. A subtle change in the way I interacted, in the way I looked at the world. And I realized something important: this wasn't just about me. The truth I had learned wasn't meant to be hoarded. It was meant to be shared. It was meant to be a ripple that reached far beyond my own life. Life, as it often does, found a way to test me. It was a crisp autumn morning when the phone call came. The kind of phone call that makes your heart skip a beat. Carol was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, when I heard the ringing from the other room. I glanced at the caller ID and saw it was my doctor's office. For a moment, I hesitated. I had been through so much in the last few months. I had seen the light, embraced the truth of love, and felt a peace I never thought was possible. But sometimes, I couldn't shake the feeling that life was playing some cruel joke on me. After all, I had already faced death once. I had been given a second chance. What more could life want from me? With a sigh, I picked up the phone, trying to steady my breathing. Hello? Mr. Carter? The voice on the other end was calm but serious. This is Dr. Klein. We need to talk about your test results. Can you come in as soon as possible? I felt a chill run down my spine. Test results. I had been through so many medical tests in the past few months that I almost forgot what they had been for. But this time felt different. There was an edge to her voice. I could sense the weight of her words before she even said them. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yes, of course. I'll be there in an hour. Carol must have seen the change in my face as soon as I walked into the kitchen. I didn't have to say anything. Her eyes searched mine, trying to gauge the source of my sudden tension. What's wrong? She asked, wiping her hands on the dish towel. Dr. Klein wants to see me, I said, my voice tight. About my test results. Her face paled slightly, and she set down the towel. Is something wrong? John, what is it? What's going on? I swallowed hard. I don't know. But I have this feeling. Carol stepped closer and put her hand on my arm. It's probably nothing. You've been fine. You're healthy, right? You've been to the doctor enough times. Maybe they're just following up. I nodded, though I wasn't so sure. Something about the way the doctor had spoken rattled me. It was as if she knew something I didn't. I'll be back soon, I said. I'll let you know what's going on. The drive to the clinic felt like the longest I'd ever taken. The world outside seemed to blur as I tried to focus on the road ahead. But my mind kept racing. What if something was wrong? What if my second chance at life had been nothing but a brief moment of peace before the inevitable? I parked in front of the clinic and sat in the car for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. The cool air seeped in through the window, but it did little to calm my racing heart. I had been given so much, why would life throw me back into the fire now? When I entered the clinic, I was immediately led to Dr. Klein's office. She was already sitting behind her desk, a somber look on her face. There was no smile, no warmth to ease the tension. She gestured for me to sit, and I did, my mind spinning in circles. "Mr. Carter, I'm afraid I have some difficult news," Dr. Klein began. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "The tests came back, and there's a new growth. It's in your pancreas." I felt the room tilt. It was like the world had shifted beneath my feet. A growth? My mind couldn't process the words. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to do more tests to determine the exact nature of it," Dr. Klein replied. "But based on the preliminary results, it appears to be malignant." Malignant. That word echoed in my ears. My chest tightened. The peace I had found, the certainty of the love and truth I had experienced, it all seemed like a distant dream now, fading away with every passing second. When I walked back into the house, the weight of the world settled on my shoulders. Carol was standing by the door, waiting for me. I could see the concern in her eyes, and before she could ask, I spoke. "It's cancer," I said, my voice flat. "A tumor in my pancreas. And it looks like it's malignant." The words hit her like a physical blow. She took a step back, her hand coming to her mouth as if she were trying to hold back a scream. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." I reached out to her, pulling her into an embrace. But even as I held her, my own mind was spinning. The life I had just begun to embrace, the new perspective on love, on connection, on living without fear, what did it all mean if I was going to face death again? The days that followed were a blur of doctor appointments, tests, and discussions about treatment options. I had been given a new chance at life once, and now I was faced with the possibility of losing it again. And this time, there would be no near-death experience to save me. I kept thinking back to that moment when I had crossed over. The light. The peace. The love. I thought I had found the answer to everything. But now, here I was, standing on the edge of something far scarier than anything I had ever known. Not because I was afraid of dying, no, I wasn't afraid of that anymore. But I was afraid of leaving Carol and the kids. Of not being there to share in the moments I had promised myself to treasure. The tests continued. The treatments were discussed. I tried to maintain the peace I had felt after my near-death experience, but it was hard. I questioned everything. Was this it? Was this the end? One night, as I sat in the quiet of the living room, Carol asleep beside me, I felt an overwhelming sense of fear creeping in. I had been through so much. I had seen the light, embraced love, and felt the peace of the other side. But now, here I was, facing another battle. Another test of faith. And then it hit me. I had been given a second chance at life. A chance to love, to be present, to be the man I was always meant to be. What if that was the whole point? What if it wasn't about surviving the illness, it was about living fully in the face of it? I had already been to the edge of death. Now, it was time to live with that knowledge, to face whatever was coming with the same love and peace I had felt before. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of death. Not of what was coming. I had seen beyond the veil. And no matter what happened next, I knew that love was the only thing that mattered. The final days felt different. There was a quiet stillness in the air, something I hadn't noticed before. Maybe it was because I knew this would be my last stretch of time, or maybe it was just the peace that had settled in me after months of inner turmoil. Either way, it didn't feel like an ending anymore. It felt more like a deep breath, a gentle exhale, as though the universe was allowing me to live fully in these moments, to experience everything I had learned, and to give it back, one final time. In the weeks leading up to my surgery, the treatments became more intense. My body grew weaker, but my spirit grew stronger. There were times when I felt like I was losing touch with my physical self, like I was floating just a little above it all. I could sense Carol's worry, her exhaustion. The kids were still holding on to hope, but I could see the fear in their eyes too. They didn't know how to process it, and I didn't want them to. But I had reached a place where fear no longer held the power it once did. I had been through the other side. I had felt the light, the endless love that surrounded me when I crossed over before. That truth was unwavering, even now. No matter what happened to my body, my soul would remain at peace. And that peace was something I could share, something I could give to Carol, to the kids, to anyone who needed it. The night before the surgery, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet, Carol was upstairs, the kids had gone to bed early, sensing the tension in the air. The glow of the fireplace flickered softly in the background. I stared at the flames, letting the warmth seep into my bones. I had no idea if I was going to wake up after the surgery. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what awaited me. It wasn't the surgery itself. It wasn't the possibility of death. It was the love that I had learned to hold so tightly to. The realization that, no matter what, love was eternal. It could not be taken from me. No doctor, no illness, no circumstance could strip me of the love I felt for my family, or the love they had for me. I had seen beyond the veil once. And if that was where I was headed again, then I knew I would be met with the same embrace. I stood up, walking slowly over to the window. The moonlight bathed the landscape outside, casting long shadows across the yard. It was peaceful here. It had always been peaceful here, with Carol and the kids. I closed my eyes for a moment, and I could feel their presence, so close, so tangible, as if they were right there beside me. It was as if the love we shared created a space between us, one that could not be undone. I knew now, with all my heart, that love was the ultimate truth. Not just in the big moments, but in the small, quiet ones. In the laughter we shared over dinner. In the way Carol's eyes softened when she looked at me. In the way the kids ran to greet me when I came home. In the silence we shared as we sat together on the couch after a long day. Those were the moments that mattered. And in those moments, I knew, without a doubt, that I had been given more than a second chance at life. I had been given the gift of understanding. The morning of the surgery came far too quickly. I found myself lying in that cold, sterile hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling the air. The doctors and nurses moved around me, preparing for what they hoped would be a successful operation. But I wasn't focused on them. I wasn't focused on the pain or the fear that might come with the procedure. I was focused on the love that enveloped me. The love I felt for Carol, for the kids, for everyone I had known in my life. And as they wheeled me into the operating room, I felt a wave of peace wash over me. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. If this was my time, then I was ready. But I didn't believe it would be my time. Not yet. Not today. The last thing I remember was the sound of the anesthesia mask being placed over my face, and the soft voice of the anesthesiologist telling me to relax. And then, just like that, I drifted into unconsciousness. When I woke up, I was in a recovery room. The beeping of machines, the hum of fluorescent lights, it was all so ordinary, so real. But what was extraordinary was the feeling that I was here. I was still here. I was alive. Carol was sitting by my side, her head resting on her hand, asleep in the chair. Her face was flushed, eyes red from crying, but she was there, holding on to me. And the moment I saw her, I knew everything had changed again. It wasn't just that I had survived the surgery. It wasn't just that I had made it through another day. It was that the peace I had felt before was still with me. And it was never leaving. "John," Carol whispered as she stirred, waking up from her light sleep. Her eyes fluttered open, and the moment she saw me, her face softened with relief. She reached for my hand, holding it tightly in hers. "You're awake. Thank God, you're awake." I squeezed her hand gently, smiling through the haze of anesthesia. "I'm here, Carol. I'm here. And I'm okay." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she leaned forward, resting her forehead against mine. "I was so scared, John. I thought I might lose you. I know, I whispered. But I'm still here. And I'm not going anywhere. For a long moment, we just sat there in the quiet of the room, holding each other, finding comfort in the warmth of our touch. It was the same peace that had settled over me during those final moments before the surgery. The same peace I had found when I faced death before. And it was the same peace that would carry me through whatever came next. In the days that followed, I recovered. Slowly, at first, but steadily. The doctors were optimistic, and the tumor had been removed successfully. I would need further treatment, but for now, I had time. Time with Carol. Time with my kids. Time to continue living this life that had been given back to me. I didn't know what the future held. None of us do. But I knew this, whatever happens, it will be okay. I had already seen beyond death. I had already glimpsed the truth that love is the only thing that lasts. It is the only thing that matters. And that truth would be with me forever. As I sat at the dinner table with Carol and the kids, laughing over a meal we'd shared countless times before, I realized something. I had been given the answer. The final answer. And it wasn't in the form of an afterlife or some grand revelation. It was in the moments we spent together. The love we gave each other. The lives we touched, whether near or far. This was life. This was living. And in the end, it was enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?